EU member states show anger at Orban's escapades and cancel meeting in Budapest. A two-day informal summit of EU justice and home affairs ministers has been boycotted by several member states.
What could Kamala Harris's potential candidacy mean for Europe?
Hungary's President Viktor Orban has made EU countries angry after his so-called peace mission visits to Russia's Putin and China's Xi Jinping. For example, the traditional EU Foreign Affairs Ministers meeting, known as Gymnich, should happen in the country hosting the rotating presidency, such as Hungary. But many ministers have refused to go in a show of protest. Therefore, it will be held in Brussels.
We have to send a signal, even if it is a symbolic signal, that being against the foreign policy of the European Union and disqualifying the policy of the European Union as the party of war has to have some consequences. Well, formal consequences, symbolic consequences.
This is not the first move done by the EU. A few days ago, the European Commission announced that the European Commissioners will not be making their traditional visit to the hosting country. A two-day informal summit of EU Justice and Home Affairs ministers has begun in Budapest. The event, like other informal events of the Hungarian EU presidency, has been boycotted by several member states in recent days, with a lower level of representation of ministers. Some of the politicians attended did not want to comment on the move.
I think it's a reaction towards Hungarian external activity, maybe sometimes not to adjust it to the European framework.
I don't have any comments about this. I'm a French Secretary of State. I represent my ministry, Gérald Darmanin. I'm just here because we are European.
Following the meeting, Minister of Interior Sándor Pinta stressed that participants agreed that without cooperation, EU security cannot be guaranteed.
A határforgalom ellenőrzéseinek a zökkenőmentessé tétele érdekében valamennyi tagországnak készen kell lenni a rendszerrel, hogy megfelelő módon tudjon működni. Ez lényegesen fog javítani a belső biztonságon.
Pinter said that he was confident that all of his colleagues would attend the regular meetings.
Eddig sem volt példátlan, hogy egy-egy tagállam csupán államtitkári vagy annál alacsonyabb szinten képviselteti magát egy-egy tanácsülésen. Ha azonban ez rendszer szintűvé válik, az bizony könnyen alááshatja a Magyar Uniós elnökség presztízsét. Az pedig különösen, hogyha novemberben több tagállam kormányfője, illetve államfője dönt úgy, hogy mégsem jön el a magyar fővárosba az Európai Tanács ülésére. Kónya Rita, Euronews, Budapest.
The incumbent president of the European Council, Antonio Costa, kick-started his tenure by visiting Italy, a country that voted against his appointment. Costa met with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, choosing Rome as the first stop of his tour of European capitals. As a founding country of the EU, he said it was important to take note of Italy's priorities. In a statement, Costa said it was paramount for him to assess the perspectives and priorities of EU member states. Meloni hosted him at the Prime Minister's official residence in the Italian capital, where the pair sat down for talks. They discussed the priorities for EU actions for the next institutional cycle, according to the Italian Prime Minister's office. Costa, the former Prime Minister of Portugal, will replace Charles Michel as the Council's president from the start of December.
Harris praises Biden's unmatched legacy and looks to lock up the Democratic nomination. United States Vice President Kamala Harris gave her first speech after President Joe Biden announced that he was dropping off the race and supporting her nomination for the 2024 presidential election. Harris spoke at an event at the White House where she thanked Biden and commended him for his achievements.
Although expected in some quarters, Joe Biden's resignation as the Democratic candidate for the upcoming US election didn't lessen the overall shock. In Europe, leaders know that the result of November's presidential elections will make an important difference to the transatlantic relationship. Outgoing President Biden was quick to endorse his Vice President, Kamala Harris, as the Democrats' candidate, but what could her potential nomination mean for the EU?
I think for allies in Europe and also in the Indo-Pacific, they can expect a lot of continuity. Many of President Biden's foreign policy staffers will probably stay on for a Kamala Harris presidency if she were to win. Of course, she is more at home in terms of domestic politics. President Biden was quite unique because he really was an exceptional transatlanticist and may be one of the last of his kind. There aren't that many next generation transatlanticists in the American political system.
Officially, the EU doesn't comment on what's happening in the US, but lately there have been concerns over a possible comeback of Donald Trump. A potential Republican administration headed up by the former president would likely be significantly less supportive of Ukraine.
Nosotros tenemos que seguir ayudando a Ucrania. Los ciudadanos americanos están llamados a votar, pero tenemos que asumir nuestras responsabilidades aquí y ahora. No podemos esperar a ver qué pasa en noviembre. De aquí a noviembre el sistema eléctrico ucraniano estará completamente destruido si no se suministra una mayor capacidad de defensa aérea.
If Trump did manage to beat Harris, or whoever the Democratic nominee might be, the future of Ukraine could be less secure.
President Trump clearly sees Ukraine as an issue for Europeans to take care of. He basically stated in the presidential debate a few weeks ago that there's an ocean between the United States and Europe, and Ukraine should be the responsibility of European leaders. And I do think that most European officials see that moving forward, the defense of Ukraine and also its reconstruction will be on the hands of European officials.
It's also thought that Kamala Harris's approach to the ongoing conflict in Gaza and the Middle East might be more nuanced than Joe Biden's has been, but we'll have to wait until November for the outcome.
AIDS could be eradicated by 2030 if leaders boost resources and protect human rights, according to a new report by the UN. The UN AIDS organization released a report saying the world is at a critical moment in which world leaders can decide whether to meet their commitment to end AIDS as a public health threat by 2030. Their findings are particularly poignant in the wake of this year's World AIDS Conference being held in Germany.
Wir haben alle Methoden, sich wirksam und vollständig vor HIV zu schützen. Und es gibt wirklich überhaupt keinen Grund, dass Menschen mit HIV im Alltag oder in der Medizin, Arztpraxis oder wo auch immer diskriminiert werden. Denn die erfolgreiche HIV-Therapie schützt vollständig vor Übertragung.
The goal of the event is to provide information through speeches, talks and information stands while opening discussions about relevant AIDS-related topics and improving patient visibility. Of nearly 40 million people living with HIV across the world, nearly a quarter are not receiving life-saving treatment. This means a person dies from AIDS-related causes every minute. The new UN report shows that decisions taken this year will determine if global targets are met and whether AIDS is ended as a public health threat by 2030. If leaders take bold actions now to ensure sufficient and sustainable resources to combat the disease, the number of people living with HIV and requiring lifelong treatment will settle at around 29 million by 2050. If they take the wrong path, the number will rise to 46 million.
These beaches packed with tourists have been the root cause of recent protests in the Spanish city of Barcelona. Residents say a change is needed, but others are worried how this may impact business.
En 2023, la provincia de Barcelona, con 5,5 millones de habitantes, recibió nada menos que 26 millones de turistas. El impacto económico directo fue de 12.750 millones de euros. La economía catalana se sustenta en gran parte en estas cifras.
The impact of the protest against mass tourism and the announcement by the mayor of Barcelona to eliminate the city's 10,000 tourist apartments by 2028, pointing to the problem of housing prices, has not been well received by the sector.
Claramente un problema que no negamos, que es un problema habitacional, el precio del alquiler ha subido muchísimo en los últimos 10 años y yo creo que la administración intenta tapar sus vergüenzas a través de los pisos que ya existen para otros usos, pero esto ni va a arreglar el problema ni es la solución.
According to the Barcelona Association of Tourist Apartments, these account for only 0.77% of the city's housing. They warn that the restriction of licenses could increase the number of illegal apartments and claim that the measure could cause 40% of the city's tourism to disappear.
Sí, tendría repercusión, pero no solo en hostelería, que tendrá repercusión en todos los lados, en todos los servicios. Ahora en verano, todo el mundo sabe que en Barcelona la clientela local, entre el calor y que se va fuera, desaparece. El turista es básicamente el 50% de nuestra clientela.
On peut comprendre que les gens en ont un peu marre du tourisme, mais bon, d'un côté, ça fait quand même vivre la ville aussi, donc ils en ont besoin du tourisme. Je crois que justement, si ça s'arrête, c'est que les commerçants vont faire plus dur, et je crois que oui, c'est justement comme ça qu'ils vont perdre pas mal de choses.
Despite everything, the tourists we spoke to, they currently do not feel any type of rejection in the streets of Barcelona.